Clerical celibacy in the Roman Catholic Church is a mess. That's unbiblical. It basically teaches that a normal and ordinary priest cannot marry, they cannot have their wives and their families. So that is unbiblical. That creates many problems, what I will show in this video. Let's start from what the Roman Catholic Church actually teaches on that topic. In Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1579, it teaches that priests are normally chosen from among men of faith who live a celibate life. The next paragraph gives some exceptions, but the general restriction still applies. Generally, for example, if I had a wife, I couldn't become a priest. Maybe if I, fight it for so long and tried to, then maybe, but generally that is forbidden. Also, no one who has already become a priest can marry. They cannot marry anymore because they made vows. And I respect that, but still those vows shouldn't even exist at the first place. Let's look at Titus chapter 1 verse 6. Namely, if any man is beyond reproach, the husband of one wife, having faithful children who are not accused of dissipation or rebellious. So here we are given qualifications for an overseer. We can say that's a priest nowadays, but these positions of course evolved in the Catholic Church, but we can identify them to each other because the Bible shows us how chiefs of the church, of the congregation, are supposed to live and behave. So here it's clearly written that this man, an overseer, a priest, nowadays, must be the husband of one wife. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 3 to 5. An overseer, then, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but considerate, peaceable, free from the love of money, leading his own household well, having his children in submission with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to lead his own household, how will he take care of the Church of God? So here it's very simple teaching. If someone is a leader of some congregation, like priests, for example, or bishops, or even popes, they must have a wife. Here, clerical celibacy isn't commanded in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and in Titus chapter 1. It's even forbidden. Paul says that it's one of the qualifications of a priest, pastor, or bishop. So the Roman Catholic Church not only does something that's not biblical, they do something that's opposing what the Bible clearly teaches. Having a wife and children is a good thing. And it's a requirement for a reason. If someone cannot lead their wife, their children, then they cannot also lead the Church of God. I believe that clerical celibacy is a doctrine of demons. Well, let me show you why is that. Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. But the Spirit explicitly says that in later times some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and doctrines of demons, by the hypocrisy of liars who have been seared in their own conscience, who forbid marriage, and so on and so on. So Paul in the first century teaches that in future there will be people who will forbid marriage. And these are doctrines of demons. That's why we should not buy and listen to the doctrine of clerical celibacy. So, as we can see from the Bible, from this passage, Roman Catholicism is teaching a doctrine of demons. And it leads to a huge problem. Because how can some denomination be a valid denomination if they teach doctrines of demons? Of course, I want to point out that they make exceptions where priests actually can marry, but an ordinary man cannot marry as a priest. So the rule still applies, the teaching is still there. Of course, I am not denying that celibacy is a great gift, and it should be a choice, as Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. If someone has a big drive towards women and wants to have family, but they also want to serve God and want to be priests, why would they choose one or the other? The Bible never teaches that priests cannot marry. That's why it shouldn't be so hard to marry as a priest. It shouldn't be forbidden. So if a man wants to be married and have family, he should be able to freely pursue his call to marriage and his call to be a priest. But if someone doesn't want to get married, that's great. That's great for them. But it should not be forced on someone who wants to pursue God also. In my opinion, and also what statistics say, it creates the field to sexual abuse and scandals. We all know that there were some scandals with priests and kids in the past. Of course, that's stereotypical, but stereotypes come from someone. If there were not scandals like that, this stereotype wouldn't have been there. So there is some truth to that. And I think that if priests had this freedom to have sexual relations with women, with their wives, then there would be so much less scandals and sexual abusements. Of course, there are some nice priests, and they would have never thought about doing something with children or committing adultery, but they should still have a choice to choose to have wife. God bless you and go in peace.